All right. So today we are going to discuss institutions. It's our sort of final heavy content day. And then tomorrow we are going to go through Stata. We'll do a Stata practical. Just, I don't know how many everyone has got Stata. You're still waiting, you're still going to get. But has everyone used Stata in their analysis? I just need to see how fast I must go.
Yes. Me, I will use one on my analysis.
You use Stata?
I didn't use it, I'm intending to use it.
Okay. No, I wanted to see sort of how fast. Okay, all right, then that helps me. Okay, so then that helps me. Okay, so then we will just start from the beginning so that you get more comfortable with how Stata works and how to use the data within Stata and sort of producing analysis from it. And then you can use, and then we're going to sort of, part of that data is what you're going to use for your assignment on Friday. So on Friday, we'll be in Graduate Center 174. It really is just your day, but I'm going to be there to help with, if you need help with the Stata or coding or anything. So Mzu and I will be there, and we'll just be with you guys. And you can just work on your assignment. And I'm sure you should be, by the time you leave, you'll be done. I think the main challenges might just come through bringing out the empirical evidence that you want from the data. So that's why I thought, okay, let's have it here, where at least I'm there and Mzu is there to just help you with the coding, so that you get what you want. And then it's just you using whatever empirical evidence you have decided to bring out to use to support your narrative on Africa's development trajectory. So I will put a brief assignment in the folder, asking you what I'm looking for in the report. And it really shouldn't be difficult when it comes to writing. It should just come naturally. I think most of us kind of have a good grasp of what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa. So the way I structured it is because we were talking about internal factors. I first wanted to discuss institutions as an internal factor that how do we look at institutions, and how can we incentivize better institutions. So for us to be able to understand that, we need a framework to explain how institutions work and the relevance of institutions in promoting those growth factors that we have discussed over the past 2 days. And then after that, we are going to discuss it specifically for your in an African context. Also, South America would have been affected as well, and parts of South Asia, where we look at historical events, and we will look at how those have shaped Africa's growth path, how they interacted with the internal factors that were taking place in Africa at the time, and did they destabilize or reinforce the sort of growth path that Africa was on during that time. So we need a definition for institutions, and there are many definitions of institutions by all these people and even more people, but I think the famous definer of institutions, if I can say, Douglas North. Whenever you talk about institutions, you'll always hear Douglas North, and you'll always hear Huntington. And then in more recent terms and modern terms, you're going to hear a lot more about Asimoglu and Robinson and their definition of institutions. But what's interesting is if you read all of these different definitions of institutions, you'll find a similar underlying thread, and that is it unites society, it creates cohesion, there's collectivity, right? So Douglas North says they're humanly devised constraints that structure political, economic, and social interaction, right? It's bringing all these dynamics, your political aspect, your economic aspect, your social aspects, Political will be your leaders, economic will be those growth factors we discussed, social will be your people, and how do they interact to create development. Hodgson defines institutions as systems of established and prevalent social rules that structure social interactions. Kaiser defines it as rules that serve the interests of economic rational actors and must enhance the efficiency of their actions. Asimoglu and Robinson, institutions are rules created and enforced by the state and the citizens collectively. And Huntington defines them as mechanisms of social order, which govern the behavior of a set of individuals within a given community. So economic institutions, if I summarize that, are those that allow, they allow and encourage the participation in economic activity by the majority of the population. Not just the elite, the majority of the population should be involved in the cohesion of these factors taking place in the economy, right? These economic institutions are going to encourage, they're going to make efficient use of their skills and allow people to make the choices that they want. So you want to be able to know that you are in an economy, you live in an economy, you live in a country where if you want to come up with an idea and you want to test an idea, you can. You have that privilege. Yesterday, we were discussing how developing countries sometimes lose great minds because you don't have the institutions that will protect their innovation. And because they know that, they then take that innovation and they go and develop it in another country, usually a developed country, because they have the intellectual property rights, they have the institutions in place that will ensure that this person can develop their idea. And guess who benefits? The developed country benefits from that person's idea. And then now when it's a technology, it's embedded in a good, what are we, the developing countries, doing? We're now importing that. But it was created by someone who was born in our own country. So why are we not keeping our own talent and our skills? So these rules or institutions, they frame the incentives for businesses, individuals, and politicians as well. And they allow for entry of new businesses. We've got countries where state-owned companies are monopolies, and they push out, smaller companies that can come in and compete and actually improve the quality of the good that's being produced. And also it gives consumers more choice when there's more goods available, right? And it also lowers the price of the good. So when we have competition in economies, we are assured that the quality of the product is going to be good and that the price is going to be conducive for consumers. But in countries where the elite have the power and the influence, and if they already have stakes in certain, in some of these state-owned businesses, they tend to then crowd out any other competition coming in, right? So the institutions as well, they feature secure private property. When you open your business, you are not afraid that tomorrow the government is going to come and want to put a claim in your business just because it's become profitable. When you buy your land, you get your title deeds, it's your land, you can use it, and you can produce whatever goods you want. You are not being dictated by the government that, no, you must produce this particular product on your land, and from that product, 60% of it you're going to sell to us so that we can sell to the rest of the citizens, and 40% of it, you can keep for your subsistence, right? That's going to cut into your profits already. There's an unbiased system of law with institutions in place. This is why, this is what institutions are, or the rules that we put in place in countries. are expected to achieve an unbiased system of law, which means no one is above the law. I was very amused during, when was it? It wasn't during COVID-19. When they had the Indian Prime Minister in United Kingdom, he was fined because he went walking. I think he went walking with his dog or something, and the dog, you're meant to pick up the poo. I can't remember now what the story was, but I remember that he did something. He contravened some law in his country, and he was fined for it. And it came out in the media. So no one is above the law, right? But you find that in some countries you get away with corruption. There is no consequences for contravening the law, for contravening the law, and you get away with it. And then it sets a precedence for others to follow the same behavior. Yet if you enforce the laws that you have put in place, and you enforce even those that are at the top, that are leaders, and they're also being punished for contravening this law, you find that everybody else starts towing the line. And you start respecting the institution within that country. And institutions also provide services that allow everyone similar opportunities to engage in economic activities in the economy, right? During COVID-19, we know there were a lot of niche markets that were created, especially for the provision of the latex gloves, the protective gear during COVID-19. So we know that in certain countries, these niche markets were created by, those again that were in power, an elite group. And if you were able to provide this particular protective gear at a lower price and you tried to enter that market, you've found sometimes you were pushed out because people had already sort of taken a claim in that market and they were making. We know that during COVID-19 you made massive profits if you were supplying anything that would help to reduce the spread of of COVID-19, right? So with institutions, what we find is that working outside the confinement of these rules may result in inefficiencies that can destabilize the economy. So absence of institutions when confronted with an economy that's modernizing. So when you're modernizing, your GDP per capita, your economic growth is increasing, urbanization is taking place. There's also improvements in your human capital and in your health of your population. Your institutions you're starting to come up with policies that are creating progress. But if you do not have strong institutions in place, this can lead to chaos. It can lead to chaos in society, and eventually you end up with failed states. So if you think of the countries that we currently define as failed states and what happened in those countries, you find that it really came down to weak institutions. It may not be absence of institutions, but the institutions were weak, such that they were not able to protect the citizens from, from the collusion that was taking place among people for rent-seeking activities, especially in countries with the resources, with natural resources. This is critical, that you have institutions, transparent institutions that force people to show how much income is coming from the natural resources that are being mined. But you find that in some countries, this is not being adhered to. And a lot of the income is disappearing somewhere. So yesterday we discussed growth models and observed that some countries choose to invest in physical capital, they choose to invest in human capital, in technological progress more than other countries. And the question that we were left with yesterday is why? Why is that? So maybe their institutions and their policies are conducive to engage in such activities. But the question is, okay, if we want to measure institutions, how would we go about it? And it's very difficult to quantify institutions because there's no model. There's no sort of theory like Solo's growth, Roma's model that captures the role of institutions in or how institutions accumulate over time. So there's no model that explicitly does this. However, we can think about our countries as a business, right? As a business model, and which makes sense, right? Because we are trying to basically, in an economy, what we are trying to do is to increase our profits, given the expenses that we are incurring in growing our economy. So if you think about our economy as a business model, then we can use a simple investment problem that's faced by business managers on a daily basis when they're trying to start up a business or invest in a business. And so businesses tend to think about the cost-benefit analysis, right? They will calculate their total costs, they will calculate their expected profit stream, and they find that, okay, once we've started our business, if our expected profit stream is increasing over time and eventually covers the initial fixed cost of setting up the business, and then we start making profits, right? So businesses will start by making losses. Eventually they'll start breaking even. If the business is really lucrative, it starts making profits, right? So if they find that in the trajectory, in the 5-year, 10-year period they are projecting their profit streams, if those profit streams are increasing and they are greater than their total costs, then you invest. You take the plunge and you invest with the hope that this is what's going to happen, right? And we know that setting up a business involves a one-time cost, right? So if you are going to open up a restaurant, you need a business license, you need physical property, so you need a location, you need a liquor license, you need to employ people. So there's a lot of initial fixed costs that are going to come up. However, what happens is that in setting up those costs, that's where your variation comes up, right? So when you're setting up your business and you're thinking about how you're going to gain your profits, this is where the variations the variations in the costs of setting up the businesses, they start occurring, right? And these can arise from differences in institutions. So a good government, where you've got institutions that are incentivizing businesses to invest, the institutions will be set up in a way that they try to minimize the costs of setting up your business, of running your business, and they maximize the profits, right, which would create incentives for investment. And these variations in setting up businesses that you find in the countries, across the world, these can explain the differences in why some countries will invest better will have higher investment rates, educational attainment, or better technology. So basically, when you're setting up your business, there are opportunities for bureaucratic red tape and for people to try and gain rents out of you trying to set up your business. And these bribes, these red tapes, they increase the costs of setting up businesses, right? So this is your country. You are open for business. You want people to come in. It's not only external multinational corporations, but even your local people. You want them to invest in businesses, you want them to build businesses, because these businesses create the employment within your people, right? So now you've got your people applying or trying to set up their businesses, and what are they faced with? They go to either is a DTI or wherever, you have to apply for a permit to run your business, and then you meet up with a challenge, an obstacle. Someone tells you, well, you know, if you want a quick turnaround to get your permit, you know, just pay an additional 1,000 rands on top, right? And some of these businesses are time sensitive. You need to set them up quickly. You don't have time to delay, because the longer you delay, when you also delay, it is increasing your costs and reducing your opportunity to gain profits. So all these costs, each of these steps in starting a business, when you go to apply for your liquor license, right? So you first apply for your business permit license. Eventually it comes out. They say, okay, fine, you can set up your restaurant by Mainland there. There's a shop that's open. Then you're like, okay, great. Then you call the health and safety inspection. It's a restaurant. The health and safety inspector comes, but he wants a little something on the side. So he tells you, well, you know, it's not exactly the best looking place, but I can give you a clean bill if you pay so much, right? Remember, you have projected your profits. And when you're projecting your profits, you ain't accounting for these little bribes that you might have to pay, right? And sometimes they become so massive that you just say, you know what, it's not worth it. I'll go to another country, I'll go to another another province to go and set up my business. These bureaucratic red tapes, these opportunities for people seeking bribes, they really add up to the costs of setting up, and they can be a serious cause of concern, which is why corruption is, it's a big disincentive for investments in countries. And if you refuse to pay, if you refuse to pay the bribe, then it holds up, right? Then that person is like, okay, fine. And then I'll leave you to think about it. I'll come back after 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks of you not doing anything. Your business is not moving, right? You need that liquor license to actually start selling alcohol in your restaurant. And that's increasing your costs. You know, these are all, and these are in businesses, they call them sunken costs, because you can't recover them, right? You can recover the costs of actually, putting the electricity, buying the stoves, buying the chairs and tables, because once you start making your profits, it's going to cover that. But these sunken costs that you had not accounted for, you don't recover from them. And sometimes those costs are just not conducive for some people or for some corporations or organizations, local organizations that want to do business in the country. So, for example, the cost of setting up a business are high in some countries. So I just want to quickly go to this link. This link is, if you want to see how long is the ease of doing business, and it's for all countries in the world. A high ease of doing business ranking means the environment is conducive to starting and operating. So the rankings are determined, they aggregate scores on several measures, right? So this is this is your total sort of aggregation of all of, not this one, of all of these measures. How long does it take to start a business? How long does it take for you to deal with construction permits? How long does it take to get electricity? How long does it take to register your property? And then they've also got getting, what is that? Getting I think it's credit. Yes, getting credit. So you can go to that website and you can see how they create this ease of doing business, and then they rank you right from where you are in relation to other countries. So if we look globally, so you can select your rankings by region. So if we just look globally, which should be this one. Why are you not? Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm here. There we go. Why is it not showing? I know one of the developed countries is the most global. It's easy to set up business. So you've also got resolving insolvency, how many days, enforcing contracts, trading across borders, paying taxes, protecting. All of this is measured because these are all critical elements of investing in a country. So if we select, and let's just go to Sub-Saharan Africa, right? So here's Sub-Saharan Africa, and Mauritius is ranked first in Sub-Saharan Africa as being the easiest country to go and do business in. It takes 2 days to start a business in Mauritius. It takes you 1 day to deal with construction permits, 1 day for getting electricity, 2 days for registering property, right? If we go down, Rwanda is there, right? So East Africa is there. Kenya is third. South Africa is fourth. You see? There is the potential we're discussing yesterday. It is not complicated. It's not difficult to jump through the hoops to start a business, to invest in South Africa. So we should be a lucrative country attracting investments, right? Right, if you want to see who's at the bottom, although it does take 26 days to start a business. I don't know if anyone has a business in South Africa. If you want to, is that true? Is that how long it takes? Let's see, Nigeria, we've got Ghana. Ghana is 13. It takes 19 days, 14 days to get construction permits. Nigeria, is that not true? How long does it take longer?
Sometimes 3 months.
Oh my goodness me. Wow. Nigeria, you're 17 out of 48 countries. 18 days to start a business in Nigeria. Is that true? Data error. In one of a paper I read, they said it actually takes 48 days to register a company in Nigeria. So Zimbabwe is 21st. You know, the last person at the bottom is obviously, can you see the countries that have instability?
Yeah.
It makes sense, right, that they would be there. So there again is those factors that we have to take into account, that, you know, these countries, it's going to be very difficult to have any investments in there because people are not confident about getting returns from their investments, right? So this is so if you want data, this is also data that you can use to show the ease of doing business. I think you will get it on, it's on World Bank, so you will get it on World Bank as well. If you want to see in your rich countries, who is Europe and Central Asia, I don't know, they always group Europe and Central Asia together. So you've got Georgia, and let's see the first one. Yeah, that's the ranking there in those countries. So I just wanted to show you that index, that there is some evidence to the ease of doing business and the amount of investments that come into your country. And they were also saying that if it's easier to do business, it shouldn't cost your country's GDP so much to invest in businesses. So, for example, in the article that I read, it takes 19 days to register a company in the United States, and it only costs them 1.2% of their GDP to actually invest in this. In India, you've got shorter time, it's 5 days, but it's very costly. It's 9.3% of your income per capita. And then in Nigeria, it takes longer, 48 days to register a company, but it costs 26% of the Nigerians' GDP income per capita due to all these bureaucratic red tapes that are taking place. So determinants of what increases costs in investing in countries is weak institutions that tend to suffer from corruption. And corruption is damaging to economic growth. If we think about during the state capture, if you look at South Africa's growth path, you can see the dip in GDP per capita during that period, during that regime during the Zuma regime, and then it starts to pick up during the Cyril Ramaphosa regime. The mismanagement of public funds was taking place in the health sector. Then during COVID-19, there was looting that was taking place. And then this, I think, most of us know about that there's construction mafia in South Africa. So if you want to, you have to pay, if you're in the construction industry, there is certain people that are going to come and collect a little bit of money from you to allow you to build in that particular region. And this was last year, at the end of last year, it became very prominent, and there were quite a number of reports that were coming out. And there was the one construction owner who said that it's costing him millions of his money because of the construction mafia and because of the delays. Because if they don't pay, then what happens was you come back and you find your property either destroyed or something has gone. And these are important equipment that you need for your construction. So it's just easier to pay, right? I guess you, as a business owner, again, you then have to decide, is it worth it to pay the bribe? How much is it going to cost my expected profit stream? For some, they'll pay. For others, they were pulling out. And then you don't get the physical capital that we were talking about, which is a growth promoting factor. You then don't get people building infrastructure. And then you wonder why, okay, so now there's no physical infrastructure, you've got labor with human capital that's coming into the market, but there's no physical infrastructure to employ them. So again, these costs have severe implications on the growth trajectory of the country. So those are determinants of costs, right? And these costs, we perceive them as anti-growth policies. What about determinants of profits? What would be conducive to expected profitability of an investment in your country? So there are three factors. Firstly, the size of the market is important. So you can imagine if BMW spent millions developing a model such like the X5, and they only sold it in Germany, they wouldn't make much profit, right? Because before long, everyone in Germany would be driving an X5, right? So the size of the market is important. So obviously it makes sense for them to export, right? To increase their profit stream. They need to cover their fixed costs with whatever fixed costs they put into developing this model, the R&D, and so what they do is they increase production, and they can only increase production if they're selling to a larger market. So again, the globalization or the trade becomes important in your growth model. So that speaks to being an open economy. Stability of the economic environment, right? So if you're in a country in which your rules and regulations keep changing frequently, you go to sleep, you wake up the following morning and you're told, no, there's a new Minister of Finance in the building. No one told you why, nothing. Yeah, that is going to really rattle people. Yes. Yes, Toa.
with the development by Donald Trump. Like, he can always just write a tweet and everything is shaping. For example, the issue of AGOA as well. I think it's something that has that will impact more African countries. For example, those institutions who are doing business or doing manufacturing in South Africa. Now they will find it difficult to export their product because now they have to pay that. Like, there's no benefit of AGOA now.
Yeah, exactly. And we saw how the markets became so volatile when Trump just came out and announced that he's imposing these trade tariffs. Everyone, business investors, they get very anxious when they are not certain of what's happening, right? And Trump is a really good idea of someone who will just the next day on X, there will be something there. And now people, so it was very interesting when I went there for a conference a few weeks ago, and I was asking them, and you could, they were saying we are uncertain. When I was speaking to my colleagues there, and I was like, well, how is it? How do you, how are you coping? I was feeling very sorry for them. How are you coping? And they're like, the problem is we are uncertain of the future now, whereas before they knew that, okay, this is our president, he's going to stick to the constitution and he's going to follow the laws that have been in place from whenever they put in the constitution, right? But now you've got someone who's so unpredictable. And for them, they're very uncertain. They don't know what's happening. And apparently, some are also just thinking of migrating to regions where there is stability in economic and political environment. So this is very interesting, right? Wars and revolutions are also an extreme form of instability in countries. So we already saw that when we looked at the ease of doing business. All the countries that are at the end of that ranking are the ones that are currently in a conflict or coming out of a conflict, right? The third factor is when you have a government that's interested in that's interested in diversionary activities over productive activities. This is a disincentive for your population to be productive, right? So the extent to which the institutions in an economy favor productive activities, that has a positive impact on your investments. However, if you find that your government tends to misallocate resources into sectors where they maybe have a stake, or they might not have a stake, maybe there's an elite group that has a stake in there, and the government is extracting some kind of extra income from there. Those are diversionary activities because you are removing resources from your key economic sectors, such as your manufacturing, investing in your investing in your education, investing in your health sector, investing in the services sector, if you are in a country where your services sector is starting to come up, right? But you find that sometimes, because they want to keep their power, they're going to invest, they'll give more money to the military sector. That then becomes a type of diversionary activity, which is not conducive for growth. And I don't know why, political leaders, they think citizens don't see what's happening and don't understand. So even if you are a person who's coming from the rural area, if you're being squeezed and you can see that you are not getting the provision of certain public goods that were provided for you, you are going to become agitated and frustrated, right, with the leaders. And you are less likely to want to vote them in. But of course, as we know, whenever it's an election year, they will always target the rural areas because that's where the majority of their constituency and voters are. So these diversionary activities, they really reduce the incentives for profits. Unfortunately, institutions go hand in hand. Institutions are a human construct, right? So they are designed by people. You know, it's a person who came up with a policy, and the people who come up with the policies tend to be the ones who break the rules, right? So institutions are structured. So in some countries, those controlling political power, they find it more beneficial to concentrate the power in the hands of the narrow elite with few executive constraints on them, right? So no one can tell them when they are breaking the rules that they themselves set. And then these institutions are then structured by this elite group to use their power to limit the competition. Right? They increase their personal gains by looting rather than supporting economic progress. So these are sort of the patterns that we see. A few examples in the literature. In South America, the plantation system, which was successful, would not have been successful if the institutions were not designed to exploit the labor in South America. In South Africa, if you think of the apartheid regime, that would not have been, the apartheid regime would not have survived without institutions that were designed to suppress and exclude the indigenous labor from the political process, right? Similarly, in the States, again, racism would not have survived for so long were it not because of the institutions that were in place during that era that advanced one group of race over the other, right? So those that are in power, they're the ones that set up the policies, come up with the rules. And unfortunately, if you find yourself in a country where you have self-seeking leaders, you find yourself in a position where those rules, the institutions that they're putting in place are really to increase their wealth, not necessarily to be inclusive of the entire country.
Yes, for me, I would say in most countries, those leaders are not the one who set the direction of the country. I believe there's an invincible hand of certain individuals who are living in certain boardroom and give the order to those leaders. It is rare if you would to analyze the situation to say that these are the leaders. Most of the time they are written down and they don't know who take decisions.
Yeah. So this is what they were saying, that sometimes it's an elite group that is surrounding or that has the ear of the president. I mean, right now, Elon Musk, we could say, is an elitist, right? And has got the ear of the president.
Mm-hmm. For example, if you can check the refugee thing or case or rather SAC, like he allows South African to go there because he's from South Africa, whereas in other countries there are these individuals who seek refugee status who qualifies to be given those as well.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you think about it, that there's a war in the Gaza Strip, right? Those ones are not going to. Do you think they're going to get refugee status to go to the States?
So like they will decide in the space of about 90 days,
you know.
But already South African have moved.
Getting, and they are not being persecuted. They don't fit the definition of the United Nations definition of a refugee. But the narrative that's being told is being told in such a way that they do fit. But we know it's not true, right? They're not being persecuted in their countries. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I can remember in Nigeria during the elections, one of the strong thoughts that was put forward for us to vote for Tinubu was that he could speak to, we call them cabals in Nigeria. So he would be able to handle the cabals because these people, sometimes they are faceless, and irrespective of whoever the president is, they are able to manipulate the person. And the truth is that everyone has done, and everyone could be finished. So it's just a political play, and sometimes it's not the leaders themselves, it's these cabals that we do not know.
Yeah. I was about to refer to something which I think sometimes it may not necessarily be about leaders. I think sometimes it may be about the structure of the economy itself. some governments in Western countries do not have as much responsibility like ours. Ours has got the responsibility to redistribute the country's income, so that includes taking from those who have and ensure those who do not have are catered for.
Yes.
It might not necessarily attract someone who wants to invest here, knowing that there is influence of trade union, for example. The corporate tax is relatively high. It's also very important for the government to, whilst applying a business model, to also bring about having people to adopt equity-focused measures such as social grants and all of those things. So those are costs that the government may not necessarily account for. They are not coming back. So when conducting cost and benefit analysis, the government is not necessarily concerned about getting those costs back. So inequality also defeats the reciprocal responsibility or obligation that we are supposed to be having as residents and the government, where the government should be giving us services, and then we are paying back to ensure that there is efficient allocation of resources. So sometimes it's not all about governments favoring specific cabals and all of those. In many cases, that's the structural issues
Within the economy, business model. And to add to that as well, we can think about when we talk about historical institutions, like we were talking about, that the structural makeup of the country also determines the sort of policies or reforms they're going to put in place, right? What's interesting to ask as well is what kind of structural economy, what kind of country did we inherit after the historical events had passed? What kind of economy was in place at the time, right? And we know that in quite a number of the countries, the inequality was already quite massive. So as a new government that's coming in, your first port of call is how do you reduce this inequality? So your policies are going to be trying to address those inequalities before you start thinking of investing and, increasing savings and all of that. So yeah, so there are a lot of other factors that will be coming into play, but we'll be discussing them, right? So the importance of institutions, right? So this is why it's important for our institutions to be independent of government influence, or where if your government is easily influenced by an elite group, right? We need institutions that are independent of this type of influence, right? Such as the Constitution is really meant to keep our leaders and our government accountable to their people, right? But I know, like in some countries, we then come up with what we like to call as reforms, and we do these amendments to our constitution so that we can allow maybe our leaders to stay in power, or our governing parties to stay in power for a longer time than what had been initially suggested in this constitution, right? The public protector is another example of an independent institution, right? That's meant to keep our public officials accountable for the spending of their money, right? And that arm in the country is very important. And if any influence gets into that, unfortunately, it's going to be difficult to have transparency as to what's happening with the public officials in the country.
Looking at your third point, I'm trying to think about it, the third bullet point. I think if we think of governments in a sense of a homogeneous group or a grouping, we might miss a lot of important nuances that constitute really a government. What I mean by that is we will overlook personal interests and incentives of individuals who are within the government. And then our analysis now is based on painting government as is with the same brush as being these agents of diversion. But I think that it is plausible to think of personal competing interests within those who are in government, because if we do that, what we are then able to do is we are able to look at incentives or an environment and see how the environment enables such behaviors due to absence of strong institutions. Because, for instance, with our history, just now with Jacob Zuma and others, what we know for sure is that after the transition from Thabo Mbeki to Jacob Zuma, there was a deliberate intent to weaken institutions. First, they took out scorpions and replaced them with hawks, who are weak to this day. And we know how scorpions were. No one messed around with the scorpions. It didn't matter which position you were in. And they liked fetching you at work for some reason. They wouldn't fetch you at home. They would come for you in the office and take you out. And if you look at the NPA's strength at that point, I don't know what Batol is doing now. I don't know what that woman is there for.
It's lost its credibility.
It lost its credibility. Now, look at that. And then look at what Cyril did when he came in. He literally took Zuma's template as is and then used it for himself. Hence, Pala Pala never went anywhere and everything that's happening. So you cannot convince me and say there are no opponents to Pala Pala within government. There are no opponents to all of this mess within institutions that formulate government. There are, but I'm afraid that if we refer to government as a homogeneous group, we miss those nuances of the fact that, no, you actually have a Fiki Lembalula or whoever who doesn't have a life and skills outside politics, and they must profit as much as possible now, and they are therefore going to do this and that due to the environment allowing them.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely take your point that this is a sort of an aggregated term which is meant to refer to the bad apples within the government, because you're quite right that within the government you do have, and even in any country, you are always going to have those that have the interests of the citizens at heart. But I think what we do find is that there's less compared to some of our bad apples, or sometimes the bad apples just have that much more power and influence, such that they're able to veto the good apples in the government. So I totally agree with you. Yes, yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. So. We were talking about independent institutions, right? I think we also have the Competition Commission, which really tries to come in and ensure fairness in among companies or businesses that are within the economy of South Africa. And if there is any new player that wants to enter, especially if it's a big player, I think Walmart wanted to come in, and the Competition Commission was right there to make sure that they were not pushing out your smaller businesses out of that particular environment, business environment. So it's important to have, and we do have, right? So that's why I highlighted those institutions, to show that in South Africa, there are these really good institutions in place, and we need to foster them because they ensure the viability of the economy. And remember that the rest of the world is observing, right? We are all observing each other. So when they see these institutions enforcing the regulations and the laws within a country, this encourages them to say, okay, you know what, we're looking for a place to go invest our factory. Let's go to South Africa because the institutions are good, and we are insured that we'll get good investment rates, right? And we'll get our returns. We'll be able to set up our business without facing too many challenges. So if we just move into the empirical evidence, like we said, it is difficult to measure institutions, but there are a few data sets that you can use if you want. So according to our very simple business investment framework, it predicts that countries that attract investment in the form of capital, technology transfer, skill development, those will be the ones where institutions favor production over diversion. Institutions that are not in favor of misallocation of resources, institutions that are stable as well. So institutions tend to influence the type of investments that are undertaken in your country, right? So for example, if you think of Brazil, you can imagine that because of the high crime rate, a lot of the investments by businesses then goes into what? Into security and into putting up these secure systems. So that is going to take a chunk of your profits, right? Whereas if there was low crime rates, you wouldn't have to spend so much investing in security. You could then spend that money in improving your investment opportunities, building your company so that you can employ more people, growing your business, right? So you find that in some countries, the context or the environment is such that even with your investments, you are then having to misallocate them into a non-productive activity because, you find yourself in an unstable environment. So the institutions will also influence the type of investments that are undertaken. So these are some of the sources for annual data at country level. We've got World Governance Index, right? They have institutional variables that were created by Kaufman, Cray, and Mastrucci, and it's called an index of social infrastructure. It captures accountability of politicians, political stability, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption. So you'll find these variables in the World Governance Indicators. They start from 2001 to 2003, and then they're annual up to current, if you're looking at a country level. There's also Afrobarometer is nice. This is at a micro level, and this is a survey waves that look at national public attitudes on democracy, governance, and society in Africa. And it covers 36 countries. It's a very rich data set. It also has geolocation, so you can merge in data sets using the latitudes and longitudes if you have data, if you're looking at regions or spatial type of analysis, and you can use that as well. We also have the World Value Survey. These are also so the World Value Survey is global, and it's conducted in almost 100 countries. They capture changes in values and social norms, your political life of individuals, economic development, subjective well-being. We were discussing the subjective versus objective. In the World Value Survey, they have measures that will capture the subjective well-being of individuals and their views towards democratization, religion, And they are also social capital as well is important, and gender equality. So World Value Survey is another rich data set. This is the South African Social Attitude Survey, which is developed and collected. The data is collected by HSRC, Human Science Research Council, here in Pretoria, and they do it every year, I think. Yes, they're doing it every year. So this is it's also a rich data set, because this is just specific for South Africa, and it looks at the opinions, the perceptions of South Africa of South Africans towards their beliefs about the institutions in South Africa, the political and economic structures, their attitudes and beliefs, and sort of how their behaviors are changing over time with respect to the economic and political climate within South Africa. It's not a panel. So, they ask the survey to a different sample of South Africans every year. But it is still a very rich data set if you want to look at how South African citizens and how their attitudes are sort of changing over time with respect to what's happening in South Africa. And it starts in 2003. This data set, so it's quite nice. You've also got Economic Freedom Index. This is at an annual level. The index measures the degree of economic freedom present in 5 major areas. So it's got size of government, legal system and security of property rights, sound money, so financial integrity, freedom to trade internationally, and regulation as well. And then we've got the database of political institutions. This one looks at electoral results, such as your checks and balances, tenure and stability of the government, identification of party affiliation and ideology, fragmentation of opposition and government parties in the legislature. So you've got quite a variety of, and then this one as well, varieties of democracy. That's also an interesting one. It's at annual level for all the countries in the world, and that measures it captures different measures of democracy: liberal democracy, egalitarian democracy, participatory democracy, and a whole lot of others. And they also have an interesting addition now where they show whether the country had a democratic breakdown during this period of time, or there was no regime transition, or they had a democratic transition, so they moved from autocracy to democracy. So that's an interesting data set when you're running analysis to show, what happens to these growth factors if you're in a sample of countries where they were having breakdowns in their democracies, etc. So I used the liberal democracy from the varieties of democracy, and they've got it starts from 1800 all the way to now. So they've got a long run time series as well for most of your countries, including African countries. So that's why I like it. So just looking at our sort of trend in democracy over time, the world this is your world, so that's your average. So you can see which ones are below and which ones are above, and of course it's what we expect, right? South America, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa are the ones that are they have an average democracy trend that's below the average world. And your North America, Europe, and East Asia, they are currently above the average world. I was quite interested in this pattern because I was like, these are all the countries that were colonized. South Asia, South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and our institutions are still trying to recover.
Sorry, the top line that represent North America.
Yes. So it's North America, Canada, and Mexico is in there because Mexico is in North America.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the slump around 2020, 2019, 2020.
That was the first. Yeah, that was the first 5 years of Trump. Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. I hadn't noticed that. They're all there. That is so fascinating. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ah.
So the guy is the
What? Yeah. So that's very yes. So this data set as well, it also identifies countries as liberal autocratic, liberal democratic, full autocracy, full democratic, which and the definite for me, I was like, what's the difference between liberal and full autocracy? Is it just, but they've got their definitions, that, in a liberal in a liberal autocracy, you still have sort of relatively good institutions, but they are being yes, the people who own the people who own those institutions, yeah, are quite autocratic, right? So it's yeah, that's very interesting. All right, so if we continue, according to our framework, we said institutions are good for economic growth, and we can see that, right? When I did the correlation, these are all your rich countries here, but they also have really good institutions. Your Nordic countries are here. Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden. You've got Iceland, you've got Luxembourg, United States, Canada, Japan. They're all here. And then when we come here, countries with poor institutions, you even have my home country here, and then we've got Somalia, Myanmar, Ethiopia. We know they've got conflict.
Look, France, Germany, UK, and the US.
They are all clustered here. Yes, they are all clustered here, in this cluster here. Yeah, they're clustered here. United Kingdom is here. Germany is here, actually. It's I can't see where Russia is, because I can see some of the ones that are close to Russia, yeah, but I think it might be here.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking for these four superpowers.
Yeah.
It's the history we have.
Oh no, here's Russia.
The history we have about them and colonization, and yet you would have your Norways up there and your Switzerland and Canada doing very well, but not so glamorous as these superpowers, and they actually exceed them in terms of these institutions that
Oh yes, oh yeah. And these Nordic countries also have the highest index when it comes to subjective index of happiness. There's an index of happiness, and apparently they have the highest index of happiness. Yeah. But when you speak to some of the citizens that come from there, they don't agree. They don't agree. They say, well, actually, our suicide rates are quite high. So it's interesting, right? I don't know. All right. Again, our framework said good institutions, you're going to attract investments because people are not worried about an uncertainty in the economy. It's not as acute, the line, as with GDP, but it's still showing a relatively positive association, right? And here's your Germany. It's your same countries. Here's US, Japan, Germany, France, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Sweden, Denmark, all of them here. All of them, they're here with good institutions, and they are attracting the investments, right? Here we have, in the other one, I think we saw South Africa. Where was it? I saw South Africa somewhere. South Africa is usually sort of in the middle, right? We're kind of nearly there, but not quite there.
Our president follows the country's pattern.
Yeah?
Our president
Following the country.
standing on the fence.
Exactly, standing on the fence. That's South Africa. Because every time I do these correlations, I always find them here. Here's South Africa right here, in the middle. And then, of course, your usual Gambia, Sierra Leone, Central Africa, Somalia, Syria is here. You know what's happening in Syria. So they're not getting investments because the economy in those countries are just...
Since lifted the sanctions, who?
Yeah, I saw that. Yes, I saw that yesterday. But they were asking which sanctions were lifted from Syria. But I saw that, hey? I thought, oh, okay. No, Trump is doing, he's really trying to make his mark this time.
That's a calculated move.
Yes, oh, definitely.
But the Saudi Arabians,
Yeah.
because they were very much worried and concerned about their sisters in Syria.
Yes.
So now for him to get the oil that he wants from the Arabs,
He needs to, yeah. And then he helped the release of that American person from Hamas, the hostage, yes. Netanyahu doesn't seem very happy at the moment, but, yeah. But as I said, Trump is a businessman. So he knows, he's been in this game for so long, he knows how to make the calculated moves to gain what he needs. Education as well. This is a clear positive correlation that good institutions are going to incentivize people to invest in their skills development. Your usual culprits are here. You can see Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Germany, UK, United States. And then again here it's your usual culprits as well, where it's very difficult to invest in education if you are in an unstable environment. Very disappointed with Zimbabwe because we are coming here given the human capital that we used to have previously, but clearly times are starting to show. And I'm looking for South Africa. There we go. South Africa is actually doing pretty well here in terms of incentivizing education. So that's the data we can use. And I think, do I have another one? Oh yes, R&D, technology. So the final one I wanted to check was the association between institutions and innovation. And we know innovation, for people to be innovative, you need to have good institutions that protect the ideas that are coming up. And South Africa now here is slam bang in the middle, right on the line. These are all your countries. This is Finland, Iceland, Japan, Norway, Luxembourg. I think I can see United Kingdom here, and I can see NY, which is usually Germany. We have Russia is here, so they have the institution. Well, we know Russia's institutions, but they also have the innovation though, right? They also have innovation still taking place. China is also there. So yeah, so it seems the framework does work. This is just our corruption perception index. You can also get this data from Transparency International if you want to look at corruption and, the effects it has on certain development outcomes. It's a score that goes from 0 to 100. 100 means low. In this case, 100 is low corruption, 0 is high. And you can see, yeah, I don't need to say any more, right? All the countries that have relatively high corruption are the ones that also have relatively low incomes per capita. And if you see your global north there, your Nordic countries, there's Western Europe, there's global North America, excluding Mexico, of course.
Not a country in Africa. Africa, is it?
Which one? This one. Oh, this one.
Egypt. That must be Egypt.
Is it?
But Tunisia.
No, it's not Egypt.
It could be Libya or Algeria, eh?
Because after Morocco, you have...
Not
Mauritania. So
That's
that-
Algeria up there towards the left. That should be either Morocco.
no, it's not
Ah,
Morocco.
it-
Morocco is near Spain.
Okay, quickly
Morocco
check.
is near Spain.
Yeah.
Check.
So you can go into Spain from Morocco.
That must be Egypt then.
Let's quickly check. I've got map of Africa, guys. Map of Africa. You see, it shows that we really don't think about those because we would know these countries here. But
It's
Is
African
on
country.
Libya. Yeah.
Morocco has applied 3 times
Yeah,
to join
Tripoli.
EU. They are not Africans.
wait, is it? It's Libya. It's Libya. It's Libya. Yeah. So this is
So Libya are the culprits, Somalia as well.
yeah. So there's Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, more on the Horn. Yeah. That's no on the Horn. This is Ethiopia. This is Ethiopia.
Somalia. Then
Somalia.
Yeah.
on the horn.
It's Eritrea.
Then the middle one.
This one. Yeah, that's South Sudan. And then, yeah, exactly. So, and then there's a tiny, tiny one here, which is really dark red. And I think that is, no, that, because this tiny little one here. But this is Gabon, but Gabon, this is Gabon here. This little Gabon here. So, yeah.
Specific narrative. Okay. There we go. In print, zero in trade, the specific narrative that
So this is how we look like currently. This is 2023. This is how we're looking at like currently. And apparently, just globally, the index did increase. So corruption kind of globally increased across most of the countries, which is, should we be concerned? Or is it just becoming the norm and we need to just, just deal with it and move on?
Is Colombia in South America? You put it with the one up there next to North America.
Let's see, map of South America. When you start looking at, but it's always interesting, right? When you start looking at these images. Okay, so this is Brazil, the big one. My eyes are tiny, right? Venezuela. That's Venezuela. And that makes sense, right? So this is Colombia. So that's Venezuela, that's Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia. This is Chile, eh? They're not doing too bad. Chile, that's Argentina. This is Uruguay, Paraguay, then Brazil, and then you've got Guyana next to Venezuela, Suriname, and French. I think that's French Guinea. This one, but it's got no data. French Guinea. Just like here, I think this is Western Sahara with no data.
Proximity of that Venezuela and what you brought us on Monday. The proximity to America, North America. I blame North America. I'm sorry for my naivety. I blame Venezuela for, North America for the demise of Venezuela.
But I think North America does have a lot of stake in several of these countries in South America. Military, but resources. Remember, Venezuela's got oil. So resources. I think they've got a military base in Hawaii, which would be, Hawaii would be the islands. They don't show them here, but your islands somewhere along here. So they've got a military base, which is convenient, right? Because then they can stop there and move on to Europe or to Africa. And which would make sense as to why they would want a military base in Botswana, right? Where's Botswana? This is Botswana, right? Because Botswana would really be, they do have the space, the land, sort of, where they don't have infrastructure, where they can set up their base. And if they're there, they're really, they're South Africa, they're really near most of the sub-Saharan Africa, sub-Saharan African countries. And you can understand why these countries were pushing out the French military. So, so I think it's almost our break, but I think when we come back, we'll finish off with the empirical evidence, and then we'll go into the historical institutions.